Happy Monday, everyone! Today I have a new card design that I am thrilled to show you. The color medium we are going to be using today is called Color à la Cremes, and I may not have pronounced that quite correctly, but it is a water-soluble oil pastel, and what we're going to do is just scribble some color on the paper. The paper I'm using is a watercolor paper from Strathmore, and it was a real inexpensive pad. I don't know if I picked up at Michael's or Walmart, but it's not anything fancy at all. For this card, the colors I was feeling like using today were reds and yellows, oranges and pinks. So I'm just scribbling on the paper a little bit of each of these colors. And then I'm going to take a wet baby wipe and I'm going to rub the colors together. And you'll see how the moisture just makes these pastels come to life. I'm rubbing in an up and down kind of a straight motion to go with the stripes because I don't want to blend them together too much and want the colors to stay distinct. And then I'm going to do a circular motion to help them blend a little bit better. I will be cutting these out with a die cut, and the one that I'm using is by Momenta, and it is a set that I got at Hobby Lobby. I think it retails for about $12, and I believe I only paid $6 or $7 with a coupon, but it's called Intricate Flowers with Leaves. And as I place this on the paper, it doesn't matter a whole bunch if the entire die is on my color. What I'm wanting specifically is to have the flower portion be on the orange. Now the leaves do have to be on paper because I'm going to be layering papers for this today. And I'm actually cutting out 3 white pieces of paper as well as the colored one here so that I can stack them on top of each other. Now, right now, a technique that I was trying, I've not heard this technique anywhere else, so I don't know if it's original to me or somebody else has done it, is I was putting tape on top of the die, and I'm rubbing it on quite tightly so that those little pieces that were cut out don't fall out of the die cut. I tried it a little bit earlier, doing the method that's called paper piecing, where you can die cut a image and then pop out all the little holes and put them in later. But you can see here that these are tiny, tiny little pieces, and it was going to take forever. So by putting the tape on, what I'm doing is keeping the entire paper, the cut and the holes, together in one piece. I'm now rubbing glue all over, and I'm making sure to especially get it on those small pieces in the center so that they all stick beautifully to my card. And then I'm going to line it up, tape and all. And it was a little hard to line up because the tape was obscuring my view some. But the nice thing with wet glue instead of like a stickier tape is that you can slide it around a little bit for a couple of seconds before it starts to actually dry. Today I was a little impatient and didn't quite wait long enough for the glue to dry. So in a minute you'll see that a couple of my centerpieces came up with the tape. But it was okay because I could take my craft pick and just push them right back down. When you do use tape like this, there are special tapes you can spend money on that won't rip paper, and I think they're really a waste of money because you can just use a piece of masking tape and stick it to your shirt or your skin a few times to get the stick off. And if you do that, it will not hurt the paper and it will peel off just fine. But it does help to pull at an angle. If you pull straight up, the paper might still rip. But if you pull at an angle, for some reason, and I don't know why, it just releases a little bit better. I mentioned earlier that I die cut 3 pieces of white paper as well. And I'm taking the first piece right now and I'm putting glue all over it. And we're going to lay that on top of the paper that we just placed on the card a moment ago. The paper that I'm using today is by Hero Arts. It's their premium white cardstock, and it's a real nice thickness. This is one of the first times I've worked with this paper, and I did discover that if it gets wet, I think it pulls a little bit faster than paper that I've used in the past, but it is a really nice texture. And even though I cut out 3 layers to put on this card, I only ended up needing 2 of them because it was thick enough to get the effect that I wanted. Now I decided that it might look nice to have the leaves on this card have some green to them. So I'm taking a little scrap of green paper and I'm going to line the die cut up just so the leaves get cut out. And then I am trimming them off of the center portion of the flower. And you'll see that I mess around a little bit trying to decide if I do want the green or not and where to place it. And in the end, I decided that it would look really nice to have the green leaves between the two white layers. So at this point, I have the peach and pink colored layer, and then on top of that, one complete white layer of cardstock. Then I'm taking my green leaves and I'm just putting a little bit of glue on the tip of them. I decided to let the ends of the leaves stay loose, and that gives it a little bit more depth. Some of them are lifting up a little from the page and creating a little more shadow, and I just liked the feel it gave it to leave that loose. And then on top of the green leaves, I'm putting another complete white layer. I didn't do a complete layer with the leaves because I put them off-centered, and the green paper was thin enough that I don't think it was going to make too much of a difference in the card laying nice and flat. And after gluing up and pushing down this last piece, it lined it up just fine, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Now I'm going to take my stamping block and I'm just going to push that down on the card to give it nice even pressure all over. And this is just to make sure everything is fully in contact with the glue and that it dries nicely in place. For the sentiment, I'm going to be using a stamp from a Stampin' Up set called Forever Lovely. This stamp reads, "You are loved." And I think it's a particularly nice sentiment because it fits so many occasions. It works for Valentine's Day. This card is actually a sympathy card for a friend whose grandmother died. It would work for a get well card, or, I'm just thinking of you. And so it's one that I'm really happy to have the opportunity to have. And the ink I used is a Momento, and it's called Cottage Ivy. And then the sequins I purchased from Stampin' Up recently, and they are just the exact right colors to go with this card. And so I'm pulling out some that are greens and peaches, and I think maybe a yellow one as well. And that's just to add a little bit of shine, because this is a very plain card, and that extra sparkle of embellishment just adds a lot to it. After adding the sequins, this card is finished. But I wanted to take a couple of moments and show you a couple other designs I came up with using leftover scraps. And so this here is the leftovers from those die cuts that I cut out. And I'm taking out my water-soluble oil pastels again. And this time I wanted to add a little bit of green. So I started with green, and then I went back to the same colors that I used before, yellows and oranges and pinks and some peaches. And this time I'm scribbling all over the paper, and I'm using the Hero Arts paper instead of watercolor paper. And you'll see when I wet it with the wet wipe, it's not moving around. The color is sticking fast. So I tried again to add some more color and get it to blend, and it just didn't work. So I went back over to my watercolor paper that I was using earlier, and you will see that I have completely different results. And that piece of paper, I'll cut into strips and do something with it at some point. And so on the watercolor paper, I'm scribbling color all over again. And this time you'll see that when I wet it with the wipe, the colors just move and blend beautifully. After I get the color blended well everywhere, I take the sheet away from the camera and I dried it with my heat tool, and then I added it to the front of an A2 size card. The leftover portion from my die cut, I also trimmed down to, I think it was 3 3/4 by 5. And that's so I would have a 1/4 inch border clean around the card. And I centered that die cut image as best as possible into that frame. And we're gluing it down here. And then I'm going to use the exact same You Are Loved stamp that I used earlier, except this time I'm going to use an orange ink from Tim Holtz, a Distressed Oxide, because it's the shade that I have that best matches the colors I used in the background. I'm then going to use the exact same sequins that I used earlier, except this time I'm going to stick with the ones that are the orange and yellow colors. Now, after getting these sequins down, if you like the card as is, you could leave it alone just like that. But I decided that it would be nice to have a little bit more texture in the middle of it. And so I went ahead and die cut another small portion of just the flower. I didn't cut the leaves out. And this was from the leftover scraps that I colored earlier from the first card. When I cut out from the watercolor paper, I had some left over on the edges. Just enough to cut out the center of the flower. This shade of orange is a little bit lighter than the background, and it just added a soft, nice extra dimension. Now we're back to the original card, and I also want to show you one more card I made. I don't know if you remember that I mentioned I cut out 3 of the die cuts. Well, I only used 2 on the first card, so I was able to take the third one and create one more card. This is done exactly the same as the first one, except I did not add green leaves. And this card only has 2 layers total, the base layer and then the white one on top. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, thanks for watching.